to India and Ireland, round Africa and back again. We don't really need to know just where we'll go. Maybe Canada, then to Brazil, then through the Alpine foothills. All I really want to know is, can we go? Oh baby, can we go? Round and around the globe.
Welcome to Take Me With You, episode 99. I'm Ryan,
And I'm Cheryl. We are two well-traveled people who want to go everywhere.
but that's not going to happen. So instead, we'll travel vicariously by inviting a guest to share their unique travel stories with us.
Today, we're talking to Venetia. Venetia is my boss's boss, and she is the development manager of Vision House in Renton, Washington. Welcome, Venetia.
Yay!
Thank you. Glad to be here.
I guess I didn't say the most important part is that you are a very proud dog mom. I don't think we can forget that part.
No, we can't forget that part. Very proud and very happy and content.
Yeah.
Dog mom, for real.
So Venetia, why don't you tell us just a little bit about what is Vision House and what does Vision House do?
Sure. So Vision House is a 30-year-old nonprofit organization that provides transitional housing and wraparound supportive services to families experiencing homelessness who have children. And we also offer diversion services to families who won't actually live in our transitional housing, but who need that extra support and information to take their next steps.
Diversion services. I've never
Yeah.
heard that term before.
I know, it's one of those kind of in-house terms that begs explanation.
Yeah.
So diverting them from the whole transitional housing experience, because that's not the service that best suits their needs.
Mm. And you said it's been around for 30 years. How long have
Yep.
you been a part of Vision House?
7 years now. Hmm.
That's great.
Yeah. And it was a pretty cool call to come work there. I had wanted to be a part of the staff for several years, but there wasn't a position that met my experience leading up to that point until 7 years ago. They created a new position, and I was pretty excited to be able to come on board.
And then you recently said, Cheryl, you need to come work for us.
I did.
And it worked.
Cheryl, well, not only Cheryl, you need to come work for us, but Cheryl, we need you.
I mean, I think a lot of businesses would be better if Cheryl worked there. So
Shh, 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 shh. No, that's not the truth. No, it's only Vision House that will be, yeah.
Cheryl only fits at Vision House. Good.
That's right.
What was that?
Come on. No, it is true. Cheryl is multi-talented and would be a tremendous blessing in a number of places. And is, actually.
Yep. I totally agree. Venetia, we have 3 questions that we like to ask all of our guests to get started. First question, why do you travel?
Well, it's such an interesting question because my traveling now is very limited. Now I travel to get away and rest and kind of hit the refresh button. But back when I was living overseas, I traveled to explore. I traveled to seek out new life and new civilizations, to go boldly go where but to experience another culture from the already other culture in which I was living, and actually hit the refresh button there as well. It's about refreshing for me and getting away from what my everyday vista is.
What about travel fills you up and helps refresh you?
Oh, that's so easy to answer. It's nature and other places. It's the flora and fauna that I don't normally see in my home area. I often travel with a bird book that's for that area and actually track the birds that I see. I mean, not like a birder, not like a true birder, not even close, but it just helps me to look at my environs in a different way and to be aware of different things.
So it gives you a special kind of lens or thing to focus on when you're looking at the environment.
In addition to just appreciating different vistas and topography and different ways of living and doing things. Yeah, I love the countryside.
Do you have a favorite type of vista or nature scene, or do you just enjoy all of them for their uniquenesses?
That's interesting. Now that you mention it, I think I do, and it's vistas that are in some ways similar to the Pacific Northwest. One of my favorite places to have seen was Switzerland and Jungfrau and the Swiss Alps, and being there for a cowbell and horn blowing competition up in a bowl up in the Alps was like one of the heights of my travel experiences. But just that, the beauty and grandeur of huge snow-capped mountains and the sky, and I love those mountain ranges.
I agree with you.
I still need to go.
Yeah. Second question, what type of traveler are you?
So I have an answer to that question, but I'm wondering if it's what you mean.
Well, it's purposely open-ended, so you can interpret it however you want to.
Okay, super. So I am, like I've said already, a rest and refresh traveler. So I like to keep my travel bags almost ready to go. So I have travel supplies that are just for travel. And when I get there, I like to camp in just one place. I don't like to hop from one overnight place to the next. I like to have a hub so that I'm always kind of coming home to that. And I like to kind of camp in an area and really get the feel of that area. So I'm not much of a one for going to see 13 historic places in one day in a string of days. Maybe one historic place for every 3 or 4 days. But then to really see the countryside and really explore nature and try out the local food and local performances and get a real feel for the culture and the environment. I don't know what kind of traveler that makes me, but
well, I'm curious what that looks like before the trip versus on the trip. How do you like to figure out what your options are for food and local performances, or what historical thing you might want to see before you're traveling, or would you rather just figure it out as you go?
That's such a good question. And it's probably a good mix of those things. So I like to have some planned things where I know it's a sure thing, make your reservations ahead of time, vet the restaurant ahead of time, so that you've got some that are plugged in already. But then I do like the spontaneity of walking past some funky place and say, hey, let's just go here.
What would you say is your number one travel tip?
We love this question.
Yeah, well, I do too. And I thought about this ahead of time, but I'm changing my mind as we've conversed. I think my number one travel tip is really to be humble, to be willing to try things, to be willing to sound silly, but to be willing to put in the effort to be a part of the culture and not just observe it.
What does that look like for you, to be a part of the culture instead of just an observer? How do you make that happen?
So learning some phrases in the language that is used in that environment, trying to order things at a restaurant in the language, as much as at least making that effort. I've found in my experience that most people really appreciate the fact that I've tried, even though I've completely butchered the language or pronunciation or whatever. And just not be. I mean, acknowledge the fact that I am a tourist. There's no denying that. But to try things like public transportation rather than taking a cab everywhere, or try the little cafe on the corner, and when your friends are saying, "Oh, you're going to get food poisoning," or "You don't know how they cook that," it's like, well, everyone else is eating there. They've been here for a while, clearly. Just trying things. Take some risks. Calculated. I don't think I would do sushi in just any place, for instance.
But I think that's a good point that you are proof of being willing to sound silly when you were pretty much fluent in Russian, correct?
By the time I left, yes. But in the beginning, no.
But that's so impressive. And probably, I'm sure you had moments where you sounded really silly. And then the result was that you were fluent in a difficult language.
Mm-hmm. Really silly and worse. Really silly and mocked. Yeah.
Okay, Venetia, what is the travel story that you're going to be sharing with us today? I think we may have a little hint based on what Cheryl just said.
Yes. Yes. So my travel story is actually, the basis of the story is an 11-year gig in Russia, where I lived in St. Petersburg. Well, actually about an hour south of St. Petersburg in Pushkin for 5.5 years. And then in Tver, which is a town about 2 hours north of Moscow, for another 5.5 years before moving back to the States.
All right. So tell us about these two towns that you lived in.
So when I moved to Pushkin, there was my first, really it was the first time I'd ever lived anywhere outside of Seattle.
Wow.
I'm a native Seattleite, had never moved to another state or city, let alone another country. So that was an expected culture shock right there, just moving to another culture and, figuring everything out with different food, different language, different clothing, different style of life, much more pedestrian there. But also what I didn't realize in going in, and which was, I think, a real deficit in the training that I had, the cultural training that I had prior to moving there, was the level of what we would term poverty here in the States. Although I would not say that they were impoverished, but very more economically cautious than people in the States are in general. So I wasn't prepared for that part of the culture, part of the cultural difference. But so I moved there and rented an apartment with a new acquaintance, a young woman, for about a year. And I remember landing in Russia with I and several other Americans with this pile of luggage, and then piling into a bus and then being shipped to who knows where, because I knew very little about the geography or directions or anything in Russia. Landing in our apartment at probably 11 o'clock at night and being left there and not abandoned, but just, they had to move on. And we were in a very small 2-bedroom apartment that was probably 600 square feet, 500 square feet. I shouldn't say very small, relatively small. And I remember putting my suitcases in my room and then going to the kitchen that was probably 9 by 9, 8 by 8, something like that. There was just enough room for a sink and a little counter and a little 2-burner stove and a table and 2 chairs and some room to kind of move around it. And looking out the window and watching people walk past I was up on the 2nd floor and thinking, if the house caught on fire, I don't know how to say help.
Wow.
I don't know I don't even know what my phone number is right now. And I wouldn't know how to recite my phone number. The first year that I moved there, I and the team that I came with were completely dependent, utterly dependent on our interpreters for life. And without the interpreter, there was a definite feeling of helplessness.
Wow.
We began studying the language a little bit, but our purpose in being there was to teach a Judeo-Christian morals and ethics curriculum to the elementary school educators in town. We had been invited to come do so. And it was urgent because this was in the year, 2 years following the fall of communism in the mid-90s. And the spine, they had just deboned the chicken, if you will. There was no moral and ethics core to their whole educational process. So the Ministry of Education had made a public ask on national television that was broadcast on national television. We need help. We need a core for our curriculum. Who can help us? So, long story short, I went with an organization of educators to go and work with the schools with this curriculum. So our friendship circles were interpreters who knew the English language well, or to varying degrees of well, we found out,
Sure.
who would go with us into the schools and teach this curriculum.
So you're talking about how important those interpreters were to you, but they obviously weren't with you 24/7.
Right.
So what did life look like when it was their time off?
So life when their time was off was a series of hand gestures and pointing and, the few words that we were able to pick up from, all of us had taken like a summer crash course in Russian because we were only anticipating being there for 9 months.
Oh, wow.
Yep. And then come summertime, we would return back to the States at the end of the school year. So one of my experiences was, and let me just say, I love Russia. I absolutely love Russia. It was such a great experience being there. Pushkin is the town that houses, or that has, Catherine the Great's summer palace. You may have heard of the Amber Room. That is one large room that is entirely mosaicked in amber.
Okay.
Yeah, so there's.
I'm gonna have to Google that right now.
You make a note of that. It's stunning. It should be they should expand the list to one of the 10 wonders of the world.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah. It's phenomenal.
My goodness. That is unbelievable.
Yeah. So when I first moved there, Catherine's palace was had still been divested of the Amber Room from the Second World War. The whole palace itself was in a ruin after the war.
Wow.
And what you see now was rebuilt and restored to its original splendor. And I would say even beyond its original splendor.
Wow.
They've done a fantastic job restoring that. So where was I going with that now? Catherine's Palace, Pushkin. From Pushkin to St. Petersburg is about a half an hour ride on the electric train, which in Russia is called elektrichka. Okay. So you take a bus from your house or your apartment to the Vokzal, which is the Russian train station. And then you pay for a ticket. You stand in line. Lines are the thing. You stand in line, get your elektrichka ticket, which is this little tiny tissue paper thing. And then you board the elektrichka, and then someone would come through the compartments and check everyone for their elektrichka ticket. And then, so you either sit if there's a seat available, or you stand if it's rush hour and the place is completely packed out with passengers. And then it makes 10 stops or so on its way up to St. Petersburg. And then you jump off there, and then 2 of the stops on the way to St. Petersburg are crossover stops with the underground metro system, which in St. Petersburg and in Russia are extraordinary in their efficiency and in their design. Kind of art for the people type idea. But anyway, so I was traveling on the Elektrichka up to St. Petersburg, and without my interpreter, so venturing into getting some supplies for the first time on my own. And so at that time, this is back in the mid-90s, foreigners were not that common, especially foreigners who were living in Russia. All right, so I go into a store that sells household wares like pots, pans, dishes, hand towels, that kind of thing. And it's a very small store. Everything is made out of wood. And you walk in the door, the floors are wooden, the countertops are wooden with maybe a little formica on the top. But it's almost like it was almost like walking into a big kitchen with no windows. So if you just imagine these countertops encircling the room, like maybe a 20 by 40 room. But there are people behind those countertops. And then immediately behind the countertops are these wooden shelves at a slant or flat. And on those shelves are all of the products that store sells, one each. So one example of those products.
Oh,
and in order to hold the product, you have to ask permission to see the product. And then the clerk behind the counter, once you got her attention, would pull the one example off the shelf and put it in front of her, and you could look at it and touch it, but you couldn't move it anywhere. So then, in order to purchase that product, you had to get a receipt from that person with the name of the product and the number of rubles that it cost. And then you took that little check up to the cashier and you paid for that item. And then she would give you little slips of paper to take back to that counter, whereupon the woman behind the counter would then go get the product that you were actually going to take home and wrap it up in a package and then hand it to you.
Wow.
That's a lot of steps.
It's a lot of steps, and that's just for one.
Oh my
So
goodness.
you have all of these different places. So I have to go to another lady for the hand towels. I have to go to another lady for the soap.
Oh my goodness.
So I go to all of these people and I don't know how to ask to see it. So I'm just looking at it and saying, okay, I guess that's going to work for me. And I have no way to communicate with the register person what it is I want to buy. So what do? I draw little tiny pictures on a piece of paper with the number of rubles that were placed on a card next to that item on the shelf. And I take it up to the cashier. So remember, this is my first time. Can't really speak the language. I could only count to 10 at this point, I think. And I have these rubles in my hand, and I slide the picture over to the cashier, and I kind of give one of those cheesy little grins and shrug my shoulders, and I'm like, well, there it is, right there. And she holds the picture up, and she looks at the pictures, and she looks at me, and she looks at the pictures, and I don't speak Russian at this point, right? But I'm guessing that what she said was, okay, everybody, come here, because you're not going to believe what this stupid person has just done. Because all of the people come running over to look at this picture that I drew and laugh and laugh and laugh. And it's one of those things where, there was nothing else I could do.
Yeah.
I had to make those first forays out and figure life out. Morally, I was crushed inside, but I wasn't going to let that show. And it was effective they all went and got the little bits that I needed and,
Aw.
sent the little pieces of paper and, it all worked out. But, yeah, so that's how you do it without an interpreter,
Oh my god.
Wow.
at least at that point.
That sounds like a movie. To have a group of people laughing at you in a store.
Gosh. Oh, yeah. Yeah. Well, and you learn the word etet and tot. Etet is the word this, and tot is the word that.
Mm.
So you just point and say, etet, 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 etet.
Kind of
And then-
like a kid, right? Like a toddler.
Very much
Dat,
so.
Dat and dat.
Yep.
Yeah.
And so interestingly, one of the things I realized after I moved back to the States actually was why the slow language acquisition, and even after 11 years, why the language acquisition was so painful for me. I enjoy a rich vocabulary in English, and even in 10 years, it wasn't possible for me to build that kind of arsenal in the Russian language. So even though I was fluent and there was a lot of times that I could flow with conversation and not have to pre-build, like to architect the sentences or the statements that I wanted to make, most of the time I still had to do that if I needed to explain something carefully. And that absence of words that you just pull, from your head to your mouth, they just flow, right? To have to think about that all the time, to be constructing what I want to say and how can I be ready to say something and jump into a rapid flowing conversation. It's taxing and it's exhausting.
Yeah.
And one of the pure joys I have in speaking English is that rapid fire flow of ideas and, where people can just jump in and share their hearts. And one of the strong depths of compassion I feel for people for whom a given culture is not their home culture. And as they're learning a language, how hard it is to jump in and contribute, and how important it is to make space for individuals who are really trying.
Yeah. That's a really good reminder. And I try, because I haven't had the extent of experiences you have. I haven't lived overseas for an extended period of time. I've been other places where, for the most part, they speak English, but I've been in conversations where I don't know what's going on, and I've tried to engage to my limited ability in other languages, and it is exhausting. And so then when I think of my students in my class that English is not their first language, and they're trying to learn science in a language that is not their first language, and science already can be overwhelming. By the time they get to the end of their day at school, and some of these students have been in the United States for a number of years, but pretty much every year at this point, I have students where they just arrived. They just got here and they almost know English. And so, to try and figure out, how do we support them? How do we help them as much as possible not feel stupid, not feel intimidated, and not have those experiences so that they can feel success? And it's a tricky one, but it's important to remember. So thank you for sharing that experience. I think that's really helpful, just to hear what that experience is like.
Yeah, that's very well said. Ryan, you should probably stop having your whole class gather and laugh at the new student while they try to say something then.
Oh, that's a bad thing to
Yes.
do?
Did you listen to Venetia's story? That's a bad thing.
Oh.
Yes.
What about the dunce cap? Is that bad too?
No, that's fine. It's trending right now, so it's okay.
Yeah, so long as you just keep it on your head, Ryan, it's okay.
Yeah.
Oh, trust me, that's where they all see it.
So where did the decision come in to stay longer than one school year?
So about halfway through that first year, we were being invited/recruited to stay longer. They needed more teachers there were way more requests at schools than there were teachers to fulfill those requests. So while they were recruiting stateside, they were also recruiting within the teams that were already, learning the culture and staying on. So, so I and another woman on my team felt led to stay longer. I think actually half of our team stayed longer that second year. And the second year was fun because the first year we were all single on the team that I was on, and very flexible schedules. We don't have any family to be responsible for, so
right.
We were able to, at the drop of a hat, just pick up and run when someone from one of the schools called and said, "Hey, we could really use your help with XYZ." Well, the second year there were 2 singles that came back, but then there were also there was the new team, and it was 3 sets of parents with lots of children, and they were little children.
Wow.
And of all the teams I worked with, we never had a team that had that many little ones all together. So this one, I want to say, had 7 little children between these 3 families. And so we were charged with onboarding this new team and indoctrinating them into, how to buy an electrička ticket, how to buy bus tickets, how to do this. Well, boy, your nimbleness isn't a word you can use in Russia with a family that has small children. That's just learning the culture. Let's just say, crossing the street took 4 times as long. And there are no when I was there were no crosswalks there.
Wow.
So you just looked, you gauged the traffic, and you gauged how fast you needed to skedaddle across the street. Well, when you're a duck with ducklings, there is no fast, and you've got to have one in front, one behind, and one in the middle going, go, 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 go in between. So that summer was good education for us singles in the challenges that the parents were going to have with working with their kids. The end result was many of those families ended up getting a car and learning to drive in Russia, which is a whole nother deal. If you like playing chicken, you'll like driving in Russia. It's terrifying. But one fun moment regarding electričkas was when we had the moms without the kids. The dad took all the littles, and we took the moms and trained them on riding the electrička during rush hour. So rush hour, you may have seen pictures of some of the trains in China where they have professional attendants with the white gloves that will shove people into the train, the metro doors before the doors close to just pack everyone in there. Well, Russia operated, I don't know what they're like now, but they operated on a similar principle where you just crammed people onto the trains, but they don't have the person with the white gloves there. It's up to you to shove your body in there.
Wow.
So we were standing with 3 of the new female team members, and the electrička pulls up, and we'd already warned them, if it's full, we're still getting in. So the doors slide open, and it's wall-to-wall bodies. And we said, okay, arms up and in. So they put their arms up and in like they're praying, clenched. And we got behind them and we shoved them in there and then dove into the fray ourselves. And it's not unusual for a petite person to have their feet actually lifted on the ground and stay that way for the whole trip because the mob shifts, and sometimes it shifts you up. And I never had that issue. I'm pretty tall, so my feet stayed down. But in that instance, we did have a mom experience liftoff, and it was great because we didn't know how they were going to react. Were we going to have someone who would have a panic attack? Because that does happen.
Sure.
Because it's so different and you're so out of control. But the fun thing was that they all started giggling. And then they got the giggles and they couldn't stop, which was not culturally appropriate, but oh well, they all knew we were Americans anyway. So, it couldn't help that at all. But anyway, they survived the trip, and it was a good first foray for them into public transportation.
Oh my goodness.
Wow. Now that idea of just cramming in as much as you can makes me think of some of the cultural differences on personal space. And in the United States, we tend to have a very wide personal bubble, I think is the way we often talk about it, right? Is that something that is significantly different throughout Russian culture, or was the elektrichka just kind of an anomaly in that regard?
Not an anomaly.
Okay.
Yeah. And I was just thinking, Ryan, right now during this period of time that we're in, you would think with that comfort zone of distancing, that social distancing wouldn't be such a big deal as it is now, because we love that space, right? But in Russia and other European countries, there is no space like that. And it was very common to go into, let's just say a post office. And if there were a long line of people, to have them, to pretty much have maybe inches of space between you and the next person. But then there would be other people sitting off to the side on little benches or outside or not even present, but someone in line was holding their space. So if you knew you were waiting in a long line, you would not only be in a bunch with other people, but there could be numbers of people who weren't in that line, who were represented in that line. So you could think that you were next, but oh no, Natasha and Boris and Svetlana, no, they're all waiting outside. So this person says, oh, it's their turn, runs outside, gets them, comes back in. And so then these three people pile in to take their legit place in line. So that's expected for people who live there, but for people who are new, it was mind blowing.
Wow.
For the first couple of times, until you find out that you cannot gauge a line by who's in it.
Wow.
Yeah, and then the crowding too. So if there's something at a Rynek, which is a public market. If there's an open air something, it's not uncommon at all for people to just be crowded around there, and the first person to say, I want this and get it the loudest, for there to not be a line, really. It's just whoever can get in there first and get what they need.
That's so interesting. That would be so rude.
Yeah.
Here.
I know. But it's so interesting, too, to through that lens, when you observe people who are in America, for whom America is not their first culture, to see their behavior and recognize that as a potential acceptable behavior in their country.
Yeah.
The way they speak and the way they behave with their bodies physically is often a great indicator of cultural differences.
Yeah, that's really insightful. I remember, and I think we may have talked about this on this podcast, but I remember when I was in France and we were at and now I'm blanking on the name. What's the really big palace in France? Versailles. Right? And we went to, whatever. When we were at Versailles, and there were people from all over the world there. And just getting in and then walking through, I remember seeing lots of those different ways that people interacted. There were people who they just pushed their way forward. And there were other people who were trying to wait in a line. But you had all of these different ways of getting in someplace, but they were all using their own cultural rules that I don't think we often even recognize that those are rules that we follow. We just do them.
Yep. Which is one of the big blessings of international travel, right? It just it clears your own lens to look at your own culture with a different perspective. Or I should say it did me.
I think that's such a good point. And I think that helps you also evaluate what's actual morality and what's culture. Because I think we could say like, well, that person's a mean or rude person because they push past me. And it's like, that's not really a moral thing. That's just their culture. And there's so much that's tied to culture.
Yep. I agree. You could put common sense in that same category. You know, common sense is probably what you were raised with. It's not a cultural norm. It's not a moral or ethical issue. Typically, it's what you know.
Yeah. I definitely have in the last several years come to not dislike, but prefer to avoid, I think, the term common sense because it implies that everybody should just know it. And so often the things that we're talking about when we say, well, it's common sense, the whole reason we're saying it is because somebody else isn't doing it, which means it's not so common.
Oh,
And like you said,
I love that. Yes.
and it could be because of cultural differences. It could be because people are oblivious or because people are rude, but it could also be for so many reasons that we just don't know.
Yeah, that's very true. My old boss would say, don't tell yourself stories about other people. It's like we have stories. I mean, we just do it. You fill in the blanks for what someone else is doing. If they're an angry driver cutting you off or whatever it is, but we're telling ourselves a story about them. And so I think that's a good reminder is when you add a different culture to that, it gets way more complicated. So Venetia, I have to ask you to share a story. So one of the joys of working with Venetia is that randomly a Russia story will just kind of come up as she's reminded.
Yeah, random is the operative word.
It's fun when it overlaps with my living in the mountains stories, like when we commiserate about snow together, things like that. But Venetia, I got a snippet of a story one time from you, and I need more details. I think my response was, you need to come on my podcast and tell that story. So we need to hear this story. It had to do with being on a train in the middle of the night and almost getting kicked off because you had the right papers, but the guy didn't think you had the right papers.
Oh, yeah. I have two really fun train stories, actually.
Awesome.
That when they ended, my first thought was, okay, this will make a good story, but thank God it's over. Yeah. So the one to which you're referring, Cheryl, happened when I had just moved from St. Petersburg to Tver, and was in my element. Language, I found a terrific language instructor who was used to teaching foreigners how to speak Russian as a second language. Whereas I had been working with teachers who taught Russian like scholastically. So you started with the pronouns and adverbs and blah, blah, blah. But this it changed my language acquisition completely. So I was feeling fantastic in this new job, working with students, and feeling fantastic in my new digs, and was going to take my first trip to Tallinn in Estonia, which was my favorite getaway place. And I would just meet girlfriends over there, and we would hang out for a weekend and come back refreshed. But this was the first time I was going by myself, and the first time I was going from Tver to Russia. So in the Vokzal, in the train station, there are no maps that tell you where this train track goes.
Oh my gosh.
So you just get on, and it just shows you the stops, but it doesn't. Anyway. So.
And this is pre-Google, right? This is all pre-Google.
Yes. Pre-Google. There is no Bing. There's no
I would guess.
Free MapQuest. Yeah, this is still paper map territory here. But I had no qualms about that. You can buy. There were. I would assume there still are certain trains that you can purchase a bunk on, where you can get a coupe that's women only. But for this trip, those were all booked up. So I got one that was still in a fairly nice coupe, but I didn't know my travel companions.
Just pause for a moment. A coupe?
Sure. Oh, yes. So it's like the old trains that you see from, like in a 50s movie, like, what's that famous Christmas movie, White Christmas, with Bing Crosby and what's his
Danny
name?
Kaye.
Danny Kaye, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
So the one where they give the girls their tickets.
Right.
So that same picture, you're walking down a hall and all of these rooms are on one side and then the windows outside the train are on the other side. So one of those coupes you open the door and there are 2 lower berths on your left and right and 2 upper berths on your left and right. And beneath the 2 lower berths is a storage compartment that in which you can put your bags and luggage, etc. And then the upper berths have a different compartment that goes over the hallway for throwing or stowing their bags. So I get in this coupe and I have a lower berth, which is the safest one for a female. And thankfully across from me is another woman and her husband who was on the upper berth. So, but it's already 10 o'clock at night. They're already laid down to go to sleep, and we just exchanged pleasant greetings, and that was it. So anytime when you would take a train from St. Petersburg or Tver to go into Tallinn, it's an overnight train, and you're crossing the border of Russia into Estonia, and there is border patrol and security for each country. So that happens between the hours of 2 and 4 in the morning.
Ugh.
Oh my goodness.
So you lay down to sleep, and you can be in your pajamas. The border guards don't care. But some people sleep in their clothes too. It just, that just depends. So anyway, I had recently flown back into the country, and the rules for customs had changed. And it used to be that you had to declare if you had like $100 or more in foreign currency if you were leaving the country and going into another country. Well, that number had changed to, I think it was $1,000 or more. And anyway, significantly more than I would be packing. So I didn't declare anything when I flew into the country, and I had that declaration form stating that I wasn't declaring anything. But that declaration has to go with your visa and your passport and handed over to any official who wants to see your documents. So I'm set to go, have all my documents, have copies of all my documents. And we get to the first border. So this is in January, and it's 2 a.m, and the snowdrifts are as high as houses in some places.
Oh my goodness.
In Tver, we probably had 2 feet of snow that was staying, and more feet that had accumulated in places that, were being cleared off or weren't being cleared off. So beautiful, beautiful scenery out the windows. Sometimes I would just stay awake late just to look out the window and watch the gorgeous scenery go by as you pass villages and lakes and go over bridges. And I mean, I can still hear the ding, 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 ding of the train. It's a very lulling sound. It's so easy to fall asleep to it. Anyway, so we get to the border, and the train, I don't know if you've been in a train when it comes to a halt, but you can hear the cars, kind of the couplings lurching together as the whole train comes to a stop. So you hear this cha-chunk, 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 and it comes closer and closer to yours, and then it goes past yours as it, all the couplings continue to lunge together. So that's happening, and then the lights go on half light, and then you start hearing the knock, knock, knock of the guards coming down coupe by coupe to say, prepare your documents for inspection. And it's like at an airport. They can open your luggage and go through your luggage. They can open your purse, and, the bottom bunk, you have to get up so they can inspect underneath and see what's there. So they take your documentation. The lights are on. All of your coupe mates are up, and you're usually just sitting in your sleeping space while they take your documents. And so they take mine out into the hallway, which is normal. And I hear them talking. And most of the time, the guards ran on the assumption that I didn't speak Russian. By this time, I was approaching fluency in the language, but I was certainly easily conversational and I could understand everything they were saying. And so they come back and flash me my documents and say, you're out of order. And you have to be careful because authority and power are very, very high values in Russia. Who has the position is the one who has the power. And the officials on the train absolutely have the power over the travelers. So you're out of our order, you're out of compliance, pack up and get off the train.
Oh,
Oh, no.
Like, okay, number one, I have no idea where we are at this point. This was the first time I'd been on this train, didn't see the route on a map. I didn't know if I was in southern Estonia, where I know nothing about the topography. And then, I'd be out in the middle of nowhere. So, but I was just terrified at the thought of being left out somewhere where I, at this point, I didn't know. I wasn't terrified. I was concerned. Let's put it that way.
Okay.
So, but another official came and said, you have to get off the train. And I asked if they could explain, because I said, according to the airport security, my documents were in order. And they insisted that they had the latest rules, which unfortunately they didn't, but they were acting on what they knew. And so they insisted that I get off the train. So my two coupe mates politely rolled over so that their backs were to me, and I got dressed. I packed up all my stuff, and they didn't come back for a long time. They'd been gone for like a half an hour with my documents. And
Oh my goodness.
now, these are Russian officials or Estonian officials?
these are Russian officials. So we're
And
still
they're
on the
saying-
Russian side.
So
Mhm.
they wouldn't let you leave the country because your documents weren't in order.
Correct. Correct.
Okay.
Yeah. So I got all ready, dressed, packed, ready to go, but I just sat there. And I have to say that it was God that just gave me this peace. So I got up to look down the hall and see where they were. And that was the first time that my coupe mates, in fact, the gentleman up on the bunk, said, don't help them, sit down.
Oh.
And that's all he said. So I sat down and I felt like that was instruction from the Lord himself. So I closed the door. I just sat there, and they finally came back down the hallway and said, you have to get off the train. Your documents are out of order. And I gestured like, why? I don't understand. And then someone else came down the hallway and he disappeared again. And I could hear them talking down the hallway, and he's saying, I've told her to leave, but she won't move. What do we do? She's not moving. She's not leaving. And then the guy up on the bunk, just, with his palms out, gestured like pressing me down, just saying with his hands, stay put, don't move.
Huh.
And then you could hear in the distance the couplets between the cars going chunk, 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 which meant the engine was starting up again. And all of the cars were starting to tug on one another, getting ready to move. And the door slid open. The official handed me my passport and all of my documents and said, have a nice trip, and closed the door.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
With no real explanation.
None at all. So then the tears started watering up in my eyes.
Because it's all over.
Yeah. And the train started moving, and the guards had gotten off by that point. And I looked up at the fellow on the bunk and then down at his wife, and I said, in Russian, of course, what would I have done without you? And they said, well, you would have spent your vacation in Tver. And then the transition with the Estonian guards was nothing. It was just normal. So got to my friends, and that was great.
And then coming back into the country, it wasn't a problem.
No, not at all.
Huh.
Wow.
Yeah.
Oh, how stressful.
So the sock story is way more fun. So the sock story, I'm taking a weekend trip up into St. Petersburg to just hang out with some friends. And I get into
You're living in Tver
I'm still in Tver. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Still in Tver. This was a couple years after that experience. By now I am fluent in the language and just traveling a lot independently. It was very easy and very safe to do so. Even sticking your thumb out for a cab, very normal. I mean, anybody could pull over and make some extra rubles just by picking up a passenger, so long as you were willing to sit in the back seat while the driver played chicken. That was the thing. Oh. But anyway, so this time I'm taking a late night train because it was a spontaneous trip. And the only tickets left were the medium cheap ones. So I'm on the platform, and it's very dark outside, and it's early summer, I want to say, because it was fairly warm. And I get into the car, the train car, and the first thing I sense is heat. Like this thing felt like it was cranked up to 95 degrees.
Oh, no.
On the inside. Stifling, suffocating heat. And so every car has a steward who takes your ticket and checks to make sure everyone's got the things you need. You pay her, and she gives you a set of sheets to put on the bed and a hand towel to take with you when you go to the toilet. They have one toilet for every train car. That's another experience. Anyway, so I get to my coupe. It's closed. I slide the door open, and it must have been 100 degrees in that coupe.
Oh, wow.
And the first thing I sense is this heat that just washes out in an already hot corridor. And then the second thing I sense is the smell of feet.
Oh.
Because facing me on the two top bunks and on the lower bunk, all of them in V formation, so like heels together, toes splayed out, are 3 sets of male feet.
Oh, jeez.
The third thing to hit me is the loudest rumbling cacophony of snoring ever. Ever.
Mm.
And the train's already moving. That train has left the station, literally. There is no going back. And I'm exhausted. We'd had a team of people come in, and we'd been working with them and culturally training them and all. So I'm exhausted, but I'm looking at this room, and I haven't set foot in it yet. And I'm thinking, I'm going to continue to be exhausted because sleep is just not happening on this trip.
Yeah. Oh.
So I get into the coupe and decide that there's 3 men in there, so I'm not doing the pajama thing at all. I'm sleeping in my clothes. And I put my case underneath the bed and just sat on the bed and put the sheet out and just laid on top of the sheet. And I left the door open like 8 inches, hoping it would cool off by 10 degrees down to maybe 90 degrees in there, and siphon off some of the smell too. So I'm laying there, and it's a 6-hour trip. This one, it was one of the milk runs where it stops at all these little small towns on the way. So I'm laying there just listening to the snoring and trying not to smell the smells or feel the heat. And I'm just thinking, oh, okay, this is one time the train tracks are not going to lull me to sleep. And I'm thinking, I've just never been on a trip that was so loud and so disruptive to all of my senses. And then something starts rattling in the coupe. And it's not a rhythmic rattling, it's an erratic rattling.
Oh, geez.
So there is something further disrupting, and it's metal on metal.
Oh.
So I'm looking around the coupe trying to figure out, okay, is it a curtain ring? Is it a latch? Something? And it turns out that it was something inside the metal container under the bunk across from me.
Oh.
So there was no way to make it stop. So then I look up on the top bunk and I see these two long braids on the pillow. And I'm thinking, oh, thank heaven, there's a woman in here after all. She's just got those big socked feet on. So I kind of felt a little calmed by that, even though I didn't sleep. It turns out I did sleep here and there, but unfortunately, all three people went all the way up to St. Petersburg, did not stop in one of the small little towns on the way. But so that was what, 10 or 11 o'clock at night that I got on the train. So 3 o'clock in the morning, the person with braids gets up to use the bathroom. Turns out it was not a woman. It was a man who just had his hair in braids.
All right.
Okay.
Went out to use the bathroom, came back, did not go back to sleep, but sat in his bunk cross-legged with headphones on at what had to be, I don't know, screaming decibels of some electronic punk music. And so added to the snoring and the ting, 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 ting of the metal clanging against whatever, now I got... Oh my word. It was like, I had to laugh because it was just so, a comedy sketch could not have put this together better.
Yeah.
Just like Cheryl said before, this sounds like it's from a movie.
Yes. Actually, if it were in a movie, I would say, okay, they overdid it. They need to calm it down. No situation's that crazy.
Oh, but that's like my worst nightmare right there.
Yeah.
That sounds awful. Oh.
Yeah. But just for a night. Yeah. And one of those stories that really is fun to tell.
Oh my goodness. Oh, wow.
Afterwards, yeah.
I'm curious. So you said you lived for about 5 years up just outside of St. Petersburg, and then about 5 years outside of Moscow.
Yeah.
And during that time, you said it was like early 90s through kind of almost up to 2000. Was it kind of that decade-ish?
So 1995 to 2005.
Okay. All right. And so the Iron Curtain fell, what, 89? Something like that?
89, 90.
Somewhere right around
somewhere in there. Mm-hmm.
So you were coming in pretty fresh off of all of that change in that part of the world. Yeah. I'm really curious, what changes did you observe in Russia over those 10 years? What things maybe stayed the same, and what things changed, and how did they change?
With people, when we first moved, there was a lot of caution around me. The younger people were so intrigued to talk with an American, to hang out with them, to practice their English, to hear me fumble through with what little Russian I had at that point. There were others, the older Russians, many of them would have nothing to do with me or my colleagues. Because, you think about it, they were, they'd experienced a lifetime of caution.
Yeah.
Wow.
In the communist regime, a lifetime of friends, neighbors, family members disappearing and never returning. Just, dads would be taken away because someone in the neighborhood reported suspicious behavior. Siblings would be gone. So when you've got that ingrained in you, why would you take a risk with a foreigner who could be up to anything, right? By the time I left, we had been able to prove our friendship our not tenacity, but our commitment to relationships, and proved who we were, and why we were there. There was still lots of caution with some people around us, but there was much more acceptance. Just in the culture itself, like the store that I described earlier, the way you shopped for things changed. When I was first there, you had to go through a salesperson and get a ticket and a description, and then go to the register to pay for it, get a receipt, go back to the salesperson. By the time I left, there were major supermarkets all over the place where, you would walk in the door, get a shopping cart, and go take things off the shelves yourself, and have them rung up by a cashier. There were some mega supermarkets over there that would rival anything we have here. The hardware stores were, lumber at one place, paint somewhere else, tools somewhere else. I remember buying a can of paint because I wanted to paint the kitchen yellow. And turns out that I bought this can of paint that it should have caused brain damage to my entire apartment complex. Seriously, I mean, the fumes from that were so noxious and possibly toxic. But by the time I left, again, IKEA had moved in. I mean, in Russia is the perfect market for IKEA because, everything comes in a box. You can pack it home. I took stuff on the elektrichka in a bus and, lugged it through it. I couldn't take a regular taxi. I had to wait for a station wagon to show up, but there were more ways to get things done. Marshrutkas showed up, which were minibuses that operated like little mini buses, but they were streamlined, so they would take you from Pushkin to St. Petersburg without a stop, type idea. And they didn't cost much more than the elektrichka did, but it wasn't a milk run. It would take 16 people, and you were done. So they were learning more. I don't want to say learning more. They were developing different ways of doing things. And I can't, the things that I mentioned, I can't say that they were inspired necessarily by Western culture, but they are certainly examples that you can see in Western culture. By the time, I think it was in 2005, Putin was president at that time, and he was gunning for the Olympics to make it to St. Petersburg. And apparently to qualify, you have to meet certain standards. And so there were massive improvements going on with roads and lighting and structures and some restoration on the facades of the buildings all up and down Leningradsky Prospect in St. Petersburg. Just those 200- and 300-year-old buildings that Peter the Great had put in, some of them. Getting facelifts, buildings being aggressively restored. Catherine the Great's Summer Palace was seeing a lot of restoration in anticipation of those tourists. Catherine the Great's palace certainly had some restoration going on.
I have two questions, kind of
okay.
Before we close. What is something that you find yourself really feeling nostalgic about when you think about your years living in Russia?
Part of it, hearkening back to why do I travel, is the nature there. Visiting my friends' families' dachas, their cottages out in the smaller villages, the remote areas. Very simple lifestyles that they lived out there and farmed the land. I loved those trips out there, just working hard in the fields with them sometimes, but then relaxing and talking and going for long walks and, hearing crickets and seeing foxes and different animals in the fields. I miss that. I miss my friends that are there. I Skype with them though, or, Zoom with them now. I miss the culture. Um, it was an amazing time to be in Russia, where I could go see the Bolshoi Ballet. I could see their opera greats for like $3.
Wow.
I mean, it was just crazy. I fell in love with opera while I was in Russia. I saw some of the best performances of my life
Wow.
in Russia.
How cool.
Yeah, their performing arts are phenomenal. And their cultural arts, their, the folk dancers and folk singers are just beyond compare. They're extraordinary.
That's wonderful. And what's something that you think our culture would benefit if we could learn some aspect from Russian culture?
One of my girlfriends there told me after I'd lived there for several years, she said, people from America, I'm discovering, are like peaches. They're soft and warm and inviting on the outside, but there's this hard center on the inside that's difficult to get past. And she said, Russians are like coconuts. There's a hard exterior, but once you get to the inside, you have a friend for life. And clearly I've never forgotten that. And I found that to be true. They, at that time, because I can't speak for things now, but just about everyone I knew, Russian, had grown up in the Russian educational system. And that provides for your being educated with the same group of students from Detsky Sad, from kindergarten, all the way through high school graduation. So you have a very close, tight-knit collective they call it, of friends, and you are lifelong friends with them. And for them to really be a friend with someone new is only proven over a very long period of time. They say that one of their phrases is, you don't know you have a friend until you've eaten their weight in salt with them. And now they salt their food a lot. My friends did. But you can imagine, I mean, that's the long haul.
Yeah.
Your friendship is proven over time. It's not just stated with words.
Wow. Those are really good visuals.
Yeah.
Well, Venetia, thank you so much for sharing about your experience in Russia. We have a couple follow-up questions for you that we like to ask all of our guests. The first one is based on the title of our podcast, Take Me With You. If you could take us with you to just one thing from your 10 plus years in Russia, what would it be and why?
Okay. So that would be my 40th birthday party it's outside of Pushkin at Petropavlovsk Dvorets, which is the Peter and Paul castle, which Catherine the Great built for her son on a road that had to pass by her palace first, so she would always know what was going on, and then go to his palace. But it's beautifully landscaped grounds. So on my 40th birthday in February, the snow was 4 feet deep. Ooh. And I invited a bunch of my girlfriends to meet me out there. And I rented 2 troikas, which are Russian horse-drawn carriages on sledges. And there are 3 horses. So troika is 3. So 3 horses with a beautiful harness that goes up like in the shape of a bell over the 3 of them. And then there was actually a bell that hangs down from the apex of that arch. And then the driver, who was in native Russian beautiful clothing and a huge fur wrap, drives the sledge while you can sit 6 facing forward and facing backward in the sleigh behind. So there are 2 of us in troikas, and we rode all through the Piotr Pavel Dores through the grounds in these sleighs. And then they dropped us off at the castle, the palace, I mean, where they had a little cafe that played Russian classical music and served tea and little Russian dainties while you sat around and talked about how wonderful your sleigh ride was.
Mm.
It was absolutely magical.
How fun.
That
That's
sounds
a
like a
good birthday.
great 40th birthday.
Yeah.
It was. It was the best.
Cheryl, you now have something to aspire to. You've got a few years.
I was about to
still
tell you the
before
same
you're there.
thing, Ryan. Although
Yeah,
you have
mine's
less
closer.
years.
I have quite a few less years till then. But yeah.
And Venetia, what is your next trip?
Yeah. My next trip is quite a bit more domestic than going to Russia. It will likely be with my sister, and it will probably be to Maui.
Yay!
Yeah. We love going to Hawaii together. And I want to say going to Maui and using a travel agent this time. Last time we did it on our own, and we made several regrettable decisions. And we thought, yeah, we're just going to leave it to a pro the next time. I don't want to do the work.
Oh man, well, we had one on our podcast, so we could connect you if you need someone. So
Perfect. Yes.
she was
As a matter of
actually,
fact, that was our last episode.
yeah,
I
the
think.
last
Oh,
episode
wow.
98.
Yeah.
Yeah.
98 from last
Hey.
week.
Mhm.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And do you have any travel questions for us?
Travel questions for you. Yeah. So just out of curiosity, have you guys ever used a travel agent? Or I have a feeling that you both like to dig for your own stuff.
I have not ever used a travel consultant, but I think, Cheryl, you have.
Yes, I've used a AAA travel agent a couple times, and it just amazed me because I thought that they were an extinct breed, and it turns out they're not. She was able to get me better deals than I could get online, even on the cheapo sites, and she also spent the time to weed through, oh, you want more than a 1 hour layover and you prefer the layover in this city, and just all those things, and still got me this really good deal. And so she just, they have access to deals that I don't.
Yeah.
And so I've used one a couple times, and there are certainly a lot of aspects of planning a trip that I like to do myself, but figuring out which combination of flights is not it. And I think it's maybe common with AAA travel agents that they have a common deal where if they're booking your travel for you round trip, and it might just be abroad, I'm not sure if it's domestic or not, they're able to get you 3 free nights at a hotel. So the first time I used her, it was when my sister and I went to Italy and Spain. And so she got us a really nice hotel in Rome, and that we were just going to go more on the cheap side, and she was like, well, I can get you this free hotel, and this one's really nice. And she was being more picky with hotels than I would have been, and she was like, no, this one's gonna be good. And we were like, okay. And so that was nice. But I think it was good for me to go into it having looked at plane prices to see, are these actually better prices than I can find and everything, because once you start looking at plane tickets, it's hard to tell sometimes what's a good price to fly to different places. There's even U.S. cities where it feels like it shouldn't be that expensive or it shouldn't be that cheap, and so I think you kind of need to do a little bit research yourself. But Summer, who is a travel advisor who was just on our podcast last episode, she talked about how she'll do like the whole shebang for people if they want, or even come up with an itinerary if they want, or just give them ideas if they don't want commitments or anything. So
see, and that's perfect.
Yeah, it sounds pretty good.
Because I would love to just hand someone my budget and say, okay, this is my budget. This is how I want to feel when I'm flying home. What picture can you paint me that will get me to that feeling like on day 2?
Yeah. Well, and I think that's exactly what the travel advisors want to do. That's their goal. Summer really shared. It was really helpful to hear from her, I think, about what that experience is like.
Mhm.
And if I remember right, correct me if I'm wrong, Cheryl, but she shared about basically interviewing the people
Yes.
she's working with
Yeah.
to get that idea of exactly what you're saying, Venetia,
Mhm.
of what is it that you want your experience to be like, and
Mhm.
then she would tailor it to meet
Yeah.
that. So
Yeah.
I think you're on the right track.
Oh, thank you.
So fun.
Okay, we're going to move to the last segment of our episode today called Wish You Were Here. During this segment, each of the three of us is going to highlight a travel attraction from the different places that we have been. Just a little snapshot of a cool thing. Maybe it's a restaurant, maybe it's a tour, maybe it's a cool vista. I don't know what you're going to do, but just think of like a little postcard that you would send a little snapshot home that says, hey, this was cool. I wish you were here.
Oh,
So,
fun.
Venetia, what would you like to do for your Wish You Were Here today?
For my Wish You Were Here, I would like to plug something local.
Yes.
One of my absolute favorite places to go eat is the Deru Cafe in Kirkland. It's Deru.
Yeah.
And it's,
my school that I teach at is in Kirkland.
Uh-huh.
So I
Okay.
hear people talk about it, but I've never been. Tell me about it.
Oh my gosh. So it's farm to table and lots of plant-based foods, lots of herbs and spices and just brilliantly creative dishes, and very funky in an industrial area, corrugated garage door that slides open and there you are to the opening of the cafe. Limited seating, always busy. So all of these wonderful, healthy, fragrant foods, and they do up their own fruity beverages, and I think they have pizzas. I'm always getting salad or something with potatoes and roasted carrots because they're just so good. But their desserts are to die for.
Okay, now you're talking.
Oh my gosh. So they have these cakes that are dense, tall, and shall we say robust. So their toasted coconut cake is amazing. They have a dark chocolate with salted chocolate icing? Or it might be salted peanut butter icing. That's also killer.
That both sounds good.
I know, right? They have a springtime one that isn't there very often. That's poppy seed buttercream, I think. And then they have carrot cake. So for my another birthday, I went with a mutual friend of all of ours, Tori. She and I went there, and I ordered 3 pieces of cake. Now, bear in mind that these cakes, the slices would feed 3 people each, for sure. They're huge. But we wanted to taste them. We wanted to try and sample. So we sampled. It was absolutely delicious. And then we divvied up all the remains into 2 take-home boxes and took them home. And she fed the family, and I fed myself for a week or so on there. But yeah, the food is terrific. The location is really cool and crisp. And I've sent so many people there and brought so many people there. I brought donors there even to, meet with them and talk about Vision House over a really great lunch. Yeah, highly recommend it.
I still need to go there.
Travel to Kirkland.
I mean, these days that's a pretty big trip. So
yeah. That's great.
But they do
Thank you
take
for
out.
Sharing.
Sure.
Cheryl, what would you like to do for your Wish You Were Here?
Today I'm going to talk about the City Putt Miniature Golf Course in New Orleans. So I love mini golf. I've never actually played golf, but mini golf is very fun, and I love a cheesy theme, so that works really nicely. But growing up, my family, we did a trip at least one a year. We traveled a fair amount, and it was pretty frequent that at some point on the trip we would just find some local mini golf place and go mini golfing. And my sisters and I have even done that in our adult years a couple times. And so I went to New Orleans on my honeymoon. And so obviously we wanted a way more chill trip with that. And I really wanted to visit their city park because it's pretty large. Like if you look at New Orleans, you could see this big green space on the map. And I found out that they had mini golf there. So we went mini golfing and it was so fun. And we took the trolley there, and it was finally when I made it on a trolley because some things were under construction. So they just had buses, which is not nearly as fun as a trolley. But the park is gorgeous. So it's fun because it's a fun mini golf place. They have 2 courses. One is Louisiana themed and one is New Orleans themed. And we did both. So one's more about like the bayou and things like that. And then one's more about jazz. And, you know, with most mini golf, it's a pretty loose theme, but it was adorable. But then it's fun to be able to visit the park as you go there. So I would say it's a good little chill vacation thing to do if you're in New Orleans.
Nice.
How about you, Ryan?
I'm going to do a Wish You Were Here from Northern Ireland. The
Ooh.
Bushmills Distillery Tour.
Okay.
So the famous, you know, the big thing is Guinness when you go to the island of Ireland, right? And that's in the Republic of Ireland, which is in the southern side. And when we went, we didn't go there. As I think our frequent podcast listeners know, I don't particularly like alcohol, so I don't really drink because I don't like it. So it doesn't really matter to me. What I'm more interested in is the science side of how do you make it? Because that, of course, is it. What are you laughing at me for? It's interesting. You use yeast and there's fermentation and there's all sorts of science behind it. That part's interesting to me. I don't really want to drink it. And so my friends Tom and Serena that I went with, they weren't particularly interested in Guinness because it sounded like that was much more of sort of the touristy, not really going into that. And since we went into Northern Ireland, we went to the old Bushmills distillery, which is in Bushmills in Northern Ireland. And it's a fun little tiny town in Northern Ireland, and it was a fun little tour. It's nothing super big or fancy or amazing, but they walk you through and they tell you about how they make the different parts, and you walk through and you see, I mean, this is going to sound really dumb, but one of the things that I personally enjoyed was the bottling room, because it's one of those things that you see on TV, or it almost makes me think of like Willy Wonka's factory, because all of these bottles, these glass bottles are all, you know, going down the conveyor belt, and then they go through this thing and then they get filled and then they get wrapped and then they go to the next section and it gets pushed around and it's all happening automatically. And I don't know why, but that just amuses me. But it's just kind of a fun tour. It's officially, they say that they are the oldest licensed distillery in the world.
Wow.
So that's pretty impressive. And the location is great because it's sort of between Giant's Causeway and Portrush and a few of the kind of the places that if you're going to Northern Ireland, they're places that you would want to go. And the Old Bushmills Distillery is just a fun little stop just right in there that you can go. And at the end, for those of you who do like alcohol, they do have a tasting where you can taste different, I don't even know what they're called. They're whiskeys, but different flavors. I don't even know. This is how ignorant I am of alcohol. But it, you know, and then of course you can buy some if you want to, and they have a gift shop and you can buy stuff. And but it's a fun little place to go. So Bushmills Distillery in Northern Ireland.
I'll have to add that to my list. Sounds wonderful.
Okay. I think that's all we have for this week's episode. So if you would follow us on social media, that would be wonderful. Venetia hopefully will be able to share some pictures of her time in Russia so that we can post that. We are at TimWe Podcast. That's at TMWY for Take Me With You Podcast. We are on Instagram and Facebook and Twitter.
You can also email us at timwepodcast@gmail.com. Send us your guest suggestions, your travel stories. Maybe tell us about a time when you almost got kicked off on a train in the middle of the night. We'd love to hear it.
You can also call us and leave us a voicemail. We're at 406-763-8699. Or if it's a little bit easier to remember, that's 406-POD-TIMWE. We would really appreciate it if you would rate and review our podcast to let other people know what you think. Subscribe to make sure you don't miss any episodes, and share about this episode on social media so other people can hear about the awesome culture in Russia.
As always, thank you to Beth Reed Miller for the awesome artwork. You can check out more of Beth's artwork at Beth Is Something. And thank you to Erica Corbin for the use of her song Round the Globe. You can listen to Erica's music wherever music is sold or streamed.
Venetia, it was wonderful hearing you share your experiences today. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Yay!
That's all we got for this week's episode. So until next time, remember to take me with you.
Take me with you.
Can we get a sailboat chasing down the sunset as we float round and round the globe? Salty air and balmy nights, guided only by the lights above, and a little love. Oh, the world is out there waiting to explore, and all our troubles here want them to be ignored. Oh, let's go to India and I